So we're here in the Jewish quarter of the old city of Jerusalem in a place called Hurva Square, which was created when the Jewish quarter was rebuilt in the 1970s. It's called Hurva Square because it's named after the beautiful synagogue that is over here that was built in the mid-19th century called the Hurva, which has been rebuilt recently. What's most interesting is what we see over here in the square, which is a menorah, which is actually built by the Temple Institute, Machon HaMikdash, and actually has 40 kilograms of gold in it. And Machon HaMikdash is an institution which is designed to train the Kohanim, the priests, to serve in the temple, because although people have the name Kohen, Katz, Kagan, etc., priests have been out of a job for 2,000 years since the destruction of the temple. And we're supposed to expect the rebuilding of the temple with the Messianic era, and the Kohanim have to go back into action. So they're not only preparing priests, training them how to do the temple sacrifices, but also making the garments that they used and all the vessels that were in the temple itself. And this is one of them. This is not a facsimile. This was made to be used in the temple. But what it's based on is a fascinating story, which is so relevant to where we are today. In the year 70, after 4 years of revolt, the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. The Jews rebelled in 66, the Romans destroyed the city. And the destruction of the city was led by the Roman general Titus. His father Vespasian with a father-son team that led to the siege and destruction of the city of Jerusalem and the burning of the Second Temple in the summer of the year 70. And if you go to the city of Rome today, you'll see right not that far from the Colosseum, which is that great amphitheater where they had all the blood sports, there's an arch which is called Titus's Arch. And Titus's Arch was built by Titus's younger brother Domitian to commemorate the Roman victory over the Jews. When the Romans won a big victory, they would have a victory parade, and all the legionnaires would march in their uniforms, carrying all the booty of the people they had vanquished with the most valuable prisoners. And you can see in the image on Titus's Arch, if you walk on the inside of the arch, you'll see that the menorah you see here today is the exact size and the exact shape of the menorah you see the Roman legionnaires carrying in their victory parade, which was called the Triumph. And it was meant to commemorate a major victory of a great empire over the Jews, which was one of the biggest revolts the Romans ever had to put down. And that destruction of Jerusalem will lead to the 2,000-year exile that we find ourselves even until today. Destruction of the Second Temple, where Jews are scattered around the world. And for 2,000 years, there's literally almost no Jews living in the land of Israel. There's always some of us here, but for the longest period of time, the land of Israel is devoid of its Jewish population. What's amazing is on November 29th, 1947, when the UN actually did something useful, they voted 33-13 with 10 abstentions to partition Palestine. So after 2,000 years of exile, the countries of the world, primarily led by Europe and the United States, voted to basically reestablish a Jewish state. Well, you have to appreciate that we're looking at now is far more symbolic than just something made to be reused in the temple again. It's symbolic of the miraculous survival of the Jewish people against all odds and our return to Israel and Jerusalem, and we're standing in the middle of a Jewish quarter, an old city rebuilt after its destruction in 1948, and a Jewish people reestablished in their homeland. It's all supernatural. We just have to learn not to take the supernatural for granted, to realize we're living in the middle of miracles. But the coolest thing is only one inscription that the company that rebuilt the Jewish quarter put in the walls of the old city, and they rebuilt it. And this is not a religious company. It's not a bunch of rabbis sitting in a bunch of offices. These are like secular Israelis who did this. But it's a quote from Zechariah. And Zechariah, we know, is one of the last of the Nevi'im, one of the last of the prophets, who's at the very beginning of the Second Temple period. And why is it here? Because there's a famous story in the Talmud, in the Gemara in Makos, when Rabbi Akiva and a bunch of other rabbis are coming to Jerusalem. Rabbi Akiva is basically the early 1st century, before the Bar Kokhba revolt, and he gets to Mount Scopus, where the Hebrew University is today, and they tear their clothes because they see the temple sitting in ruins since the time of the Romans, like 70 years earlier. And they get to the Temple Mount and they see a fox emerging from the Holy of Holies, and all the rabbis start crying, and Rabbi Akiva is smiling. And they say, Rabbi Akiva, like, why are you smiling? He goes, why are you crying? They said, shouldn't we cry when we see the prophecy of Jeremiah fulfilled in the book of Lamentations? In Eicha, it says, Jerusalem lies desolate. It's the beginning of Eicha. Foxes prowl over it. It's exactly a fox coming out of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, a place where it says, a stranger that comes near will die. Look, this is terrible. And Rabbi Akiva says, that's why I'm laughing. Because we know the difference between good and bad prophecy. Besides, one makes you smile, the other you might need Prozac to deal with. is that bad prophecy is a warning. It's contingent. It doesn't have to happen. If we listen to God and we do the right things, we maintain our relationship with each other and with Him, the good stuff will happen. We avoid the bad stuff. The good stuff is always going to happen. And that's what Rabbi Akiva is telling the rabbis. It's such a powerful piece of Gemara. He says, if the bad stuff that didn't have to happen, happened, the prophecy of Uziah and what we see, then I know the good stuff, what Zacharias says, is definitely going to happen. And that's exactly, and he quotes, the Gemara quotes exactly, Ko Omar Hashem Tzvakot, thus says the Lord of hosts. Again will dwell in the streets of Jerusalem old men and old women, and old men will walk with their walking sticks in their hand. And the streets of Jerusalem will be filled with children playing. Look around you. Literally, you're sitting in the middle of prophecy fulfilled. We don't appreciate how many generations of Jews at the end of a Passover Seder would say, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim habnuya. Now we are in Jerusalem, and it's very clear, I'm a historian and a tour guide and a rabbi, it's very clear that you look at what's going on in the world today, God has been systematically shutting down the diaspora. In the 1990s, He did it with the huge Jewish community of the former Soviet Union. Europe is now slowly shutting down. Every French Jew I know owns an apartment in Netanya. The anti-Semitism has exploded in America to be almost 400% higher than it was a year ago. Everywhere we have gone as a people, even when we come in and we do great, the higher we rise, the harder we have to fall to get us out of there, because there's only two kinds of Jews in this world. Those that are living in Israel and those that will be living in Israel. The fact that in 1900, 0.5% of the Jews in the world were living in Israel, and today half the Jews in the world live here. The fact that in 1900, one Jew spoke Hebrew as his first language. Eliezer ben Yehuda is credited with resurrecting modern Hebrew. His son, Ben Zion, was the first kid raised speaking Hebrew as his first language in 2,000 years plus. Unbelievable. Today, that half the Jews in the world speak Hebrew as their first language, we don't appreciate what for us is normal is not normal for anyone else, and we have to stand back and look at the situation we're in and recognize that history is moving inexorably towards the redemption and towards Geula. And if we don't come back when it's easy to come back, God forbid, we're going to be forced to come back in an emergency evacuation flight. There's no question that the Israel of today is not the Israel of 80 years ago, that when it was hard to live here, yeah, we have challenges, but it's a first world developed country with all the amenities you can get anywhere else. There's no sacrifice coming back to live here now. So clearly that is what is going on, and we have to wake up and look around us and not fall back to sleep and not make the mistake of believing that because we have a comfortable existence in diaspora, that it's going to last that way. If you told a Jew in Germany in 1930, what was the highest culture of Europe was Germany, that 10 years from now there'll be no Jews left in this country because how our host country is going to treat us, what Germany's going to do to the Jews, they wouldn't have believed it. And clearly, if we look, history repeats itself. That is what is happening now. The message is very clear. If all the bad stuff we've gone through happened, then the good stuff, which is redemption, is in the process of literally happening as we're speaking. And the trick is to get here now. Because if you don't get here now, all those French Jews are going to get all the really good apartments.